10 blind buys, 10 blind buys, see how they run. 10 blind buys. Okay, there's a new kid on the block. Now, I say that with all courtesy, politeness. Nick Rudo, hope I'm pronouncing your last name, Nick Rudo, is a young new vinyl community contributor over the last month or so, and he's having a 100 subscribers contest, pretty good in a month. He's been very generous in supporting my channel, and I think I have brainwashed him into getting into certain jazz records and Laurie Anderson and a few other things. He bought a Max Richter Voices record because I suggested it. Great record. Probably not the one I would start out with because of the voices and the narration, but still a great record. Get the One, was it Sleep, I think? But anyway, he's having a contest, and there's so many contests going on right now in the vinyl community on YouTube that we all have to kind of pick and choose. And this is the kind of contest I like, where it's literally sort of one basic questions, but you show a lot of records related to that. When there's all these like 20 questions of this and that, and your third child's record that they bought on their birthday in May of 1976, or the record you got when your mother wouldn't let you buy a record but you snuck out, or the record you stole from Woolworths. And no, okay. Anyway, I like this kind, and it's a kind of a good theme. I like them, again, when they're thematic and they don't have to be contests. So no offense to contest holders, but this is really cool. 10 blind buys. Records I've bought, and there's about 10 here with an asterisk, of course. I think he says 5 to 10, but he did 10 and I'm doing 10. I could do a lot more. And I'm doing them in chronological order as I got them. And I'd say most of these I got within a few months of their release dates. These aren't records that I bought years later. And in a way, this is a little bit of an extension of my Memories of a Vinyl Junkie series, because there are certain stories in some of these records, and as I go along, I'll share them. But I'll put a link below to Nick's channel, and please subscribe. Let's get him up to 250. I won't do another video until he hits 250. Is that a promise? No, I'm just, I think, well, anyway, here we go. So 1966, there was a local music store near me that we'd ride our bikes to. So 1966, I'm 12 years old, and I went to the store because I was playing drums, and I was switching from drums to guitar to be in my friends Larry and Danny's garage band. But I took first drum lessons at this music store, but they also had a whole center of records. And when I'd saved enough money, either from my allowance or my grandmother would give me things, or paper routes, and did I mow lawns? Maybe, whatever I did to get money in those days. My bar mitzvah wouldn't be for another year, so that's when the big cash out payout happened. But I went through one. I remember it was just before dinner time, and after school I'd ride my bike, 4 o'clock to 5 o'clock, or 4 to 4:30, and ride my bike to this record store and look through it. And I picked this up because of the cover. And I had no idea what I was getting into, and that is the Mothers of Invention Freak Out. I think I used to sneak these records in and not let my parents see what they were. My parents were really cool about it, but all of a sudden my record was like, this collection was like this, and then my parents would blink and it was like this. I remember sort of sneaking records because I didn't want them to think that I was spending all my money on records. Of course they knew it. Susie Cream Cheese. I listened to this record every day 2 or 3 times for many weeks. It just was so out there, so different than anything. Those of you who know Frank Zappa and the Mothers know this record, so I'm not going to get into the details of it. But it made me laugh. This is 1966, 12-year-old kid buying this record. It made me laugh. So Freak Out, Mothers of Invention was a total blind buy. And I was semi-addicted to the Mothers ever since. In 1968, there was a record I bought strictly before the cover, and I'm not quite sure I didn't even know what the fuck this was. United States of America. It came in this envelope. Columbia Records. It says Columbia Records. I didn't know. You couldn't go on Google or YouTube or anywhere to check these things out. There wasn't even Rolling Stone magazine yet. Oh, was there 68? I guess there was. No, yes, no, but yeah, about that time. Or was that 67? See, United States of America, a Joseph Byrd project, all this stuff I would learn later, but it came in this envelope. It looked like these secret documents, and I was so intrigued about this. And this is where you can get records for about $250 to $279 on sale, which is a lot of money then. You weren't making much money. This is produced by David Rubinson, and this is Joseph Byrd project, also with Dorothy Moskowitz, Gordon Moran, Rand Forbes, and Craig Woodson. It's experimental, avant-garde, neoclassical. Before we knew what neoclassical was, electronic, psychedelic. I love this record. It's so fucking cool. It's become a cult classic around record collectors. Sundays issued a mono reissue of it some years ago. It's, Moog synthesizer, guitar, electronics, echoes, all the studio effects you'd expect of a record around this time. And it's pretty cool. All the lyrics are on the back with songs like The American Metaphysical Circus. He would actually go on, Joseph Byrd, to do the American Field Hippies on Columbia. There's something Field Hippies. I'm blanking out there. You're going to put it in the comments. He would also be a arranger years later in the 1978 on Ry Cooder's jazz album. So really experimental album, and I still love this record to this day. It's so wild. It, goes through the whole cycle of songs and music, and then kind of at the very end has The American Way of Love, which basically is a combination of the songs put together, almost like a reprise in a Broadway show or something. So really cool record. Also in 1968, Larry and I went to a mall record store in Stonestown, Portals to Music, and Larry and I both bought this record. And I don't remember how we heard of it. And of course, it's music from Big Pink, the debut album by the band. I didn't really know about the band and Dylan, and I knew about Dylan, but I didn't know about the band touring with Dylan, I don't think. And I remember playing this record and not getting it initially. It was, if you know the record, The Wait, that's the song that kept recycling my brain. I kept playing that song. But some of the songs right away, Tears of Rage, even the Dylan songs and the Dylan and Rick Danko recordings, Richard Manuel and Robbie Robertson. This has become one of my favorites. Of course, Chest Fever, the organ on Chest Fever by Richard Manuel, just is something that I remember seeming so familiar. So I might have heard that on the radio or something, but I really didn't know about this. I didn't know that Bob Dylan painted the cover on this initially. I didn't know the story that it was recorded at Big Pink, and now we know the whole story of the demo tapes, the basement tapes of Dylan and the band up in upstate New York on this record. Obviously, has become a classic, but in 1968, getting this record, it was very different from what I was used to. And of course, as the story goes, one of the records that Eric Clapton heard and, broke up Cream and moved on, and he said, I need to play this kind of music. I need to listen to roots music and play with Delaney and Bonnie and the whole Americana, even though it wasn't even called that at the time. And it's more rootsy, kind of soulful music and away from the psychedelic crap. That's me paraphrasing Eric Clapton. But again, a blind buy, 1968. Album from 1969, I believe, is the second album by Procol Harum, Shine On Brightly. I knew the song Wider Shade of Pale. I never got the first album in America initially. Those of you that may know that, Wider Shade of Pale is a huge, iconic song. And to this day, apparently, it's like the most played song in the United Kingdom on jukeboxes, on radio. It's got more plays than any other song. It wasn't on the first album in the UK and around the world, but it was in America, and the American version of the album when it came out was electronically produced to simulate stereo. But I got this album because of the cover. I heard of the band, didn't know a lot about them again except for that one song. Didn't hear one track on this, and this is again one of those records I played over and over and over again. It's what we did then, but literally I would play this 3 times every night while I was doing my homework. And this is 1969. Quite rightly so, it opens up as a great song, Skip Softly. Magdalena. In Held 'Twas I, the long 17-minute or so piece on side 2, is like a mini rock opera. All these different parts. Of course, the great organ playing by Matthew Fisher, Gary Brooker's soulful, blue-eyed soulful, his piano playing and his vocals, Robin Trower on guitar, Keith Reed, who wrote the lyrics. They had their own lyricist. I love this cover. It was a different cover in the United Kingdom, but I love this. I always thought when I was a kid this was an underwater photography. I didn't know about infrared photography, and it's like in the desert. Look at this. It just seemed like an underwater shot for some reason. I remember for years I didn't, I guess, look carefully and see all the cactus and things like that. But a favorite record of mine. For years, it was my favorite Procol Harum record, a band that I just love so much. It might have been eclipsed by the next record after this, the Sailor record, Ocean record. I'll think of it later. Now, I'm putting these two together, even though they're separate records, so I'm going to count them as one, and they have... The only reason I'm putting these together, because they were literally put out the same month in I think it's April 1969. They're both double albums, and they're both bands that had horn sections. A lot of the bands then, of the rock and roll bands, and I'm not talking funk or soul, had horn sections in the band. And of course, the one you all know is Chicago Transit Authority. I did not know anything about this record. I remember seeing this in a store on a wall. And what was great about this period of time, Columbia Records would put out certain double records, and they were only $1 more. So if a record on sale was $2.98, which you could get records for $2.98, they would list at $3.98. You can get them for $2.98. This would list at $5.98 or $4.98, probably originally. You can get it for $3.98. So it was only $1 more for a double record. So I didn't know what it was. Chicago Transit Authority? What the fuck is that? But obviously this has turned out to be such an iconic record, breakout record for Chicago Transit Authority, mainly because of the hit, does anybody really know what time it is? And questions 67 and 68. But also, I really like Beginnings on here that I used in a Super 8 film with my buddy Larry and Danny as a soundtrack. And their cover of I'm a Man, the Spencer Davis song that Stevie Winwood sang originally. Now, the thing about Chicago, after this, they had to shorten their name to Chicago instead of Chicago Transit Authority. I think it was something like a cease and desist, because the Transit Authority in Chicago ain't going to use that name. So, Blind Buy, great record. The only thing I'll say about them, I would buy all their records up through, I think, the 4-record live set, which was huge, with a huge poster in the wall. All their first series of records were double albums, Chicago 2, Chicago 3, and so on. But then after a while, I just started getting bored with them. They became middle of the road, schmaltzy. I just disliked them. And I think Chicago single-handedly destroyed and ruined Roman numerals for the rest of the world forever. But that same month, on the West Coast, obviously this is Chicago, on the West Coast, the Sons of Champlain. Sons of Champlain were one of the San Francisco psychedelic bands that were always playing the Fillmore and the Avalon. So they were on board with the Quicksilver Messenger Service, the Grateful Dead, Jefferson Airplane, all those bands, Santana. They were playing the ballrooms all the time. And I kept seeing their names, Sons of Champlain, but I never heard it. Nothing was on the radio. This was on Capitol Records, and I loved the psychedelic cover, and I bought this. Again, hadn't heard it. This was a blind buy. I knew the name, but I didn't know anything about the music. Okay, Son Champlain, also a horn band. They're a little more jazzy. They have vibe player in it. They're a little more, they're definitely more funky in some ways. And they have a little more psychedelic, neo-psychedelic sound to them. Bill Champlain was their lead singer, someone who came out of Tamalpais High School in Mill Valley and started the Sons and Sons of Champlain. Tempestuous career because they had some infighting, and then they changed their name on their next album to The Sons, which was okay record. Then literally they totally went 360 and they changed the name of the band to Yogi Phlegm for a year or two, and then back to The Sons, and then in the mid-70s they had their own label and issued an album. But they never did anything as good as this. It opens up with 1982, a incredible song. Just really love that song. Rooftop. Get High is a 7.5-minute song with a great vibraphone solo, and you hear the sound of smoking pot. I think they're smoking pot. Hello Sunlight, Black and Blue Rainbow, and the final song, the entire side 2, 14.5 minutes, is Freedom. A jammy song, a lot of saxophone, psychedelic, kind of a very 1968 anthem. In fact, both bands had this anthemic, can't even pronounce this, feel to it. Because remember, there's a song about here that talks about the 1968, someday, August 29th, 1968, and liberation, about the riots at the Democratic Convention of '68, and it actually starts with prologue, August 29th, where you have the whole world is watching, on repetitive. So there's sort of political, social connections to this. The other thing, in 1981, Bill Champlain ended up joining Chicago and became one of their main vocalists and writers for about 15 years. But at that point, I was off the Chicago train. A schmaltzy. They were way too commercial for my taste, but fantastic record. And the irony of these both coming out the same month in 1968, and 2 blind buys I made in that month. Okay, 69. I was with my parents. We went to these friends that they used to always go to dinner in San Francisco out on Sloat Boulevard, which is not too far, a mile or two from the San Francisco Zoo on the way to the Pacific Ocean. We'd get there like at 4 o'clock and everyone would have cocktails. Of course, I was 14 years old. So I walked to this little outdoor shopping mall called Gets, Gets, and government employee something, and they had these little kind of shops within this. I think you had to be a member, but they opened it up. But they had a great record store in there. And I bought this record just because of the cover. And not that it's this greatest cover. Combination of look in the cover. This is the first album by C Train on A&M Records. But what I did notice, I was really into reading liner notes. And that's just why I remember all the shit now, 50 years later, of all these memory videos I do. Because I would read lyrics and liner notes. I would read who played on what, who produced it, who did the cover photographs or illustrations, who engineered it. And I recognize these names on here. Roy Bloomfield, Richard Green, Andrew Kuhlberg. They were from the Blues Project. I knew the Blues Project, not really well, but I knew them. I had one of their records. So this is basically the Blues Project morphing into C Train. And they only put out one record on A&M Records. And this group didn't really exist after this in the same way. Peter Rowan joined the group after this, and they were signed to Capitol and were produced by George Martin. And they got a little more in the country fusion vein. Those records, like they did covers of Lowell George's Willin' and beyond that. This is my favorite. It's a very kind of little funky psychedelic in some ways. And the flautist on here, Andrew Kuhlberg, is great. And of course, Richard Green's violin player playing in strings. The opening track is a song called C Train. It ends with this backwards, like, sucking sound that just stops. And when I heard that, I got hooked on this record. And it's such a, this is to me a secret record that if you don't have this record and you like psychedelic with a slight little funk at times, some very melodic Baroque pop type stylings, this is a fantastic record. Sight Unseen, Blind by 1969. 1972 or 3, I picked up this album, Journey by John Simon, because Warner Brothers had a series of things. When things were shrink wrapped, some records had this in the shrink wrap, almost like their version of an Obi. And Warner Brothers was really brilliant. You know, Warner Brothers had those Lost Leader series of samplers you could send away for $1 a record, $2 for a double record. And this talks about the story of John Simon. John Simon was a record producer. He was A&R record producer for Columbia Records. He's known originally, his first claim to fame, at least in the record business, was producing the single Red Rubber Ball by The Circle, written by Paul Simon, became a #2 hit, was a huge hit. He produced the band's first 2 albums, music from Big Pink, and the Brown album, the band self-titled. He produced some Simon and Garfunkel, the first Leonard Cohen record, I think it was the first one, Electric Flag, a lot of amazing records. And these little things that came on Warner Brothers records, they put them on like some early Cooder record, Randy Newman records, where they were trying to like really promote the background of these artists. I think it was a brilliant move. And since I was reading all this shit, this record is on sale and I bought it. He hasn't done a lot of albums on himself. He also produced the Last Waltz record and Big Brother and Holding Company's Cheap Thrills. So he went on his own as an independent record producer, suggested by Al Cooper, because he kind of collaborated with Al Cooper on some things, who started Blood, Sweat, and Tears. I think he worked on that first record as well. His record is out there, but this is almost like a jazzy kind of American record that's really beautiful. There's these songs, the first couple of songs, Living in the Land of Sunshine and Slim Pickens in the Kitchen, Don't Make It at All, goes on these elongated, beautiful acoustic piano solos. His voice is this thin, high-pitched a little bit, but it's really great. When I had a radio show at San Francisco State College, when I was at the radio station there, I would play Slim Pickens in the Kitchen almost every shift. And people who listened, if there's anybody listening, would really get into it. And of course, Amos Garrett on guitar on this record. Just a really great record. David Sanborn's on it. Warner Brothers, a lot of Warner Brothers people. But Journey by John Simon. This was his second album. He did a record before that, which I also have on Warner Brothers. And of course, I got that Blind by just because I knew his name. There, in one of the malls I used to go to, there was a Magnavox store. Of course, there was a record store within the mall, but the Magnavox store, sold hi-fi, console stereos, console TVs, the big wooden things, some tabletop Magnavox hi-fi and record players. And they had a bin of maybe 5 bins of records, and they were discounting them, and because they were getting rid of them. It was like closeout stuff, because I don't think they were selling many records in those days. Us kids went to record stores, not a Magnavox, high-end hi-fi with wooden, TVs and stereo console stuff. But I went in there once because I saw they had a sale, and I saw this record. This also had one of those Obi things like Warner Brothers, and I can't find it now, so I usually keep that stuff. Cooder. I had no idea what this was. When you look at it now, it looks like those Folkways releases. There was nothing about the record, nothing about the music. I think I had heard his name, and I can't remember why I heard his name, but this was his third solo record. Had Performance come out yet? Because I know he was on that, on Memo from Turner, but I can't remember. I'd heard his name around, maybe I read it in Rolling Stone or something, but I picked this record out, and this is the record where I fell in love with Cooder. The Mo-Fi version of this is stupendous, very rootsy, acoustic-y folk blues and traditional stuff, and just amazing work. Amazing bottleneck guitar. Love Ry Cooder. Okay, two more. Coming a little more contemporary now to 1993. I heard her name, but I didn't know anything about her, and I bought this on CD originally in 1993. Liz Phair, Exile in Guysville. I think I heard her name, but I didn't know, I hadn't heard all the brouhaha about her, the indie darling of indie music, that this record was her answer to Rolling Stone's Exile on Main Street. I got this CD and I was blown away. I mean, obviously, when I started reading about her after I listened to it a few times, I started reading about all the press. They got into how there's this young woman talking about, female sexuality and writing about sexuality like she's a guy, because a lot of women weren't writing about this kind of stuff then. She was really an original. I love Liz Phair, especially this album, but her first few albums. White Chocolate something or other is pretty great too, but this is an amazing record. I have the box set with the demos that came out years later, last few years. Exile in Guysville, her theoretically track by track answer to the Rolling Stones' Exile on Main Street. Sight Unseen, Blind By. And lastly, my friend the archivist made a mixtape for me that had one track by Joanna Newsom. From her first record, and she's a harp player with this very high, I want to say like early Kate Bush, but almost even higher if you can imagine that. Folky, again indie. Indie's like a catch-all phrase, but folky, really great. But this album, I believe, was her second album, and this is called Ys, Y-S. This is one of the most beautiful records if you like her voice. Harp playing. What's interesting about this is it was all recorded. She's like a folk artist that plays harp and has these amazing long, almost in a modern view of traditional folk music. But what's great about this also is the production. Van Dyke Park, so obviously worked on the Beach Boys and so many other artists, ended up co-producing this with her and added all these amazing orchestration. And it is fun orchestration, not just your obligatory strings and things. It's so vast, it's so majestic, it's so beautiful. I bought this, I saw this cover, I heard of her from one song, but I hadn't heard one track on this, and I fell in love with this record. Drag City Records out of Chicago. This came out in 2006, and the song Cosmia was a song I played all the time, and I played this. This was on heavy rotation in my car for a month, and I was driving my son to school a lot, and he really got into this song. And he, at this point, was, well, actually, was he 15? But I would go up the hill on my way to these projects, so I'd drop him off occasionally when he didn't take the bus up. But we played this song all the time, this record all the time. So this is a blind buy. Love this record to this day. I have all her records, and I love Joanna Newsom. Also, her boyfriend at the time, Bill Callahan, sings on one or two tracks, I believe, as well as her sister Emily. Beautiful artwork cover. I would have bought this, even if I hadn't heard that first album. I would have bought this for the cover alone. I think this is a majestic painting. Thanks for watching. I'm going to link Nick's channel below. Please subscribe to him. He's into jazz. He's into news. He's one of those young people that I think he's in his mid-20s or so, give or take. And he seems to experiment and will try everything. He's really open to stuff. So I love that there's different generations of people open to new and old and jazz and avant-garde and things like that. So Mazzy loves you, and blind buys. Wow, what a concept.